I never thought my wedding journey would turn into a battleground with my future mother-in-law. But here I am, Madison Walker, 31 years old, a successful real estate agent, and until recently, blissfully engaged to the love of my life, James Sullivan. It took me months to find the perfect dress, a beautiful vintage-inspired gown that I customized to honor my late grandmother. Every detail was meticulously chosen, from the delicate lace overlay to the subtle beading that caught the light just right. I remember Eleanor, James' mother, complimenting the dress when I showed her pictures, saying it was quaint. That should have been my first warning. Our relationship had been cordial, if a bit distant. She was always polite during family gatherings, and I made every effort to fit into the tight-knit Sullivan clan. James had suggested storing the dress at his parents' suburban home instead of our small apartment in the city, where he might accidentally see it before the big day. Mom has that huge spare closet, he'd said, and she'll keep it safe. Safe? The irony of that word haunts me now. It was exactly 2 months before our wedding when I decided to check on the dress, thinking I might need a final fitting sooner than planned. I called Eleanor to let her know I was coming, but she didn't pick up. When I arrived, the house was unusually quiet. I made my way to the guest room closet, where my dress was supposed to be hanging in its protective garment bag. My heart stopped when I slid the closet door open. The closet was filled with Eleanor's seasonal decor, winter coats, and various storage boxes, but there was no garment bag, no wedding dress. My hands trembled as I searched through the hanging clothes, thinking maybe Eleanor had moved it. Nothing. The dress, my dream dress, was gone. And with it, the excitement I had been nurturing for my perfect day began to crumble into something cold and unsettling in the pit of my stomach. James and I had been dating for 4 years before he proposed on a snowy evening in Central Park, a perfect moment that felt like the culmination of our love story. We'd met at a charity auction where I was representing a luxury property and he was attending with his family's investment firm. Our chemistry was instant despite our different backgrounds. I came from a middle-class family in a small town, worked my way through college, and built my real estate career from scratch. James grew up with wealth, private schools, and family connections. Still, we balanced each other out. I brought spontaneity to his structured world, and he offered stability to my sometimes chaotic life. Looking back, I should have paid more attention to the subtle warnings about Eleanor. There were comments about my career. Real estate is so accessible, isn't it? Though I always hoped James would end up with someone in a more established profession. Critiques of my modest family background came disguised as curiosity. "And what did you say your father did before he retired?" Followed by a thin-lipped smile when I mentioned his factory supervisor position. She'd rearrange dishes I'd prepared for family dinners, adding more garnish or salt while saying, "The Sullivans prefer a more refined flavor profile, dear." Each time, James would laugh it off. "That's just Mom being Mom. She's particular about everything." I accepted his explanations because I loved him and wanted his family to love me too. The wedding dress was special beyond its beauty. My grandmother had been my rock growing up, and she'd passed away just a year before James proposed. Her own 1950s wedding gown couldn't be altered to fit me, but I worked with a designer to create something that captured its essence while adding modern elements that felt uniquely mine. 6 months of planning, 3 fittings, countless hours poring over lace samples, and beading patterns. It wasn't just a dress, but a connection to the woman who had shaped me. As I stood in Eleanor's guest room closet, my missing dress creating a void that seemed to expand with each passing second, I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and called Eleanor again. This time she answered, her voice overly cheerful. "Madison, darling, is everything all right?" When I asked about the dress, her response was vague, evasive. "Oh, right. Well, there's been a slight change of plans with the dress. Perhaps we should discuss this when James is back from his trip. I'm sure we can sort everything out. Her casual tone about something so important sent chills through me. Something was very wrong, and I was about to discover just how calculating my future mother-in-law could be. I couldn't wait for James to return from his business trip in 3 days. This needed to be addressed immediately. Eleanor, I am already at your house, and my wedding dress isn't where it should be. I need to know where it is, right now. My voice was firmer than I'd ever used with her before, and the silence on the other end was telling. I'm actually stepping into a lunch appointment, dear. Let's talk later, she replied and hung up abruptly. I stood in her immaculate home, anger and anxiety building in equal measure. Instead of leaving, I decided to look around, thinking perhaps she'd moved the dress to her bedroom closet or another storage area. As I approached the study, I heard Eleanor's voice. Apparently, her lunch appointment was a phone call she'd taken in another room. Yes, Rebecca, the alterations should be done by next week. The seamstress said the bodice needed to be taken in significantly. Madison is quite small-chested compared to you. My heart nearly stopped as I realized she was talking to James' sister about my dress. Without thinking, I pushed the door open. Eleanor's eyes widened in shock, her perfectly manicured hand still holding the phone to her ear. I'll call you back, she murmured before ending the call. Madison, I thought you'd left. The confrontation that followed revealed the ugly truth in painful increments. First came the denials. The dress was being cleaned. It was being safely stored elsewhere. Then, as I stood my ground, insisting on knowing the truth, the excuses. Rebecca had fallen in love with the dress when she saw the pictures. It suited her coloring better. The style was actually perfect for her upcoming engagement party. Finally, when I refused to accept any of her justifications, the brutal honesty emerged. Frankly, Madison, Rebecca will wear it better. She has the Sullivan family figure, the Sullivan bearing. The dress deserves to be worn by someone who will truly do it justice. I felt physically ill, my chest tight and throat constricting, as if I might suffocate under the weight of this betrayal. That dress was custom made for me. It represents my grandmother, my family, traditions, I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. We'll get you another dress. Something more suited to your background. Rebecca is family Madison. You're still earning your place. I wanted to scream, to demand she return what was rightfully mine. But James was unreachable on his international flight, and I suddenly felt very alone in the Sullivan world. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grab my purse, tears blurring my vision as I stammered, James will hear about this. Eleanor's response haunts me still. James understands family loyalty. I'm sure he'll see this was for the best. My best friend Zoe became my sanctuary during this time. This isn't about a dress anymore, Mads, she said over emergency margaritas at our favorite bar. This is about respect and boundaries. If James won't establish them now, he never will. Meanwhile, Eleanor was busy controlling the narrative within the Sullivan family. James' cousin's aunts, I drove away from Eleanor's house in a state of shocked tears streaming down my face, betrayed not just by Eleanor, but by James' absence when I needed him most. Wondering if I truly knew the family I was about to join, and if my fiancé would actually stand by me when he returned. James returned 3 days later, and I met him at our apartment with swollen eyes and a broken heart. Babe, what happened? You sounded terrible on the phone, he said, dropping his suitcase to wrap me in his arms. I poured everything out. The missing dress, his mother's admission, the cruel comments about my body and background, how the dress that honored my grandmother was now being altered for his sister. I expected outrage on my behalf. Promises to make it right. Instead, his response left me cold. Mom mentioned something about a dress situation, but I thought she was exaggerating. Look, I know you love that dress, but isn't this something we can work around? It's only fabric, right? We can find you something even better. Only fabric? Those words cut deeper than any insult Eleanor had thrown my way. It's not just fabric, James. It represented my connection to my grandmother. Your mother deliberately took something precious to me and gave it to your sister because she decided Rebecca deserved it more. Can't you see how wrong that is? What followed was our worst argument to date. James, caught between his fiancé and his mother, tried to minimize the situation rather than address the actual problem. Mom's always been particular about family traditions. Maybe she didn't realize how important the dress was to you. When I pointed out that I'd explicitly explained its significance multiple times, he shifted to defense. You know how she gets about Rebecca? Ever since Dad died, she's been extra protective of her. Can't we just move past this for me? His inability to stand up to his mother revealed a weakness I'd never noticed before. One that made me question our future together, and uncles began treating me differently. At a family dinner the following weekend, I overheard his Aunt Martha whispering, "Eleanor says she's making such a fuss over a dress, so materialistic, not understanding of family traditions at all." Eleanor had successfully painted me as the villain, the outsider who didn't respect Sullivan ways, while she was the matriarch preserving family legacy. The final blow came when Zalai sent me a screenshot from Rebecca's private Instagram account that a mutual friend had forwarded. There was my dress, my creation, being pinned and tucked on Rebecca's body. The caption reading, "Alterations for the big day. Thanks, Mom, for finding me the perfect dress. Blessed #Sullivan tradition." The alteration process had already begun, destroying any hope of getting my dress back intact. As I stared at the image of my dream being dismantled and reshaped for someone else, something inside me shifted. The hurt was still there, but now it was hardening into something else entirely: determination. 3 weeks after discovering the theft of my dress, I reluctantly went dress shopping again, accompanied by Zoe rather than any of the Sullivan women who had previously volunteered. The experience felt hollow. Each gown I tried on was a pale imitation of what I'd lost. "This one's beautiful on you, Mads," Zoe encouraged as I stood listlessly in front of a mirror, wearing a perfectly fine but emotionally empty white dress. The bridal boutique, Elysium Bridal, was one of the most exclusive in the city, but even their finest offerings couldn't reignite the joy I felt with my original dress. As I was about to change back into my clothes, deciding to continue the search another day, a familiar laugh cut through the ambient music of the store. Through the partially open fitting room curtain, I could see Eleanor and Rebecca entering the store, their arms linked in casual conspiracy. I quickly closed the curtain, whispering to Zoe what was happening, as my heart raced with anxiety and fresh anger. "Let's go before they see us," I pleaded. But before we could make our escape, they were escorted to a sitting area just outside my fitting room. The thin walls did nothing to muffle their conversation. The Hamilton estate confirmed they have June 17th available, Eleanor was saying, her voice brimming with satisfaction. "Your father proposed to me on those grounds? You know, we've always said a Sullivan should be married there." Rebecca's excited response made my blood run cold. "It's perfect, Mom. I can't believe Madison wanted that tacky vineyard instead." "Hamilton is the Sullivan family dream venue." Eleanor's reply was the final twist of the knife. "Hamilton has always been for someone who truly carries the Sullivan legacy. You deserve it more than she ever could." I stood frozen in the fitting room, the overpriced dress suddenly suffocating me as the truth crystallized. Eleanor had never intended to welcome me into her family. I was an intruder to be tolerated, not a daughter to be embraced. The dress hadn't been an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern of ensuring I knew my place, always on the outside. As I changed back into my clothes with trembling hands, another piece of information registered. They hadn't actually booked Hamilton Estate yet. They were planning to, saving for it as some sort of family tradition, but it wasn't secured. A voice in my head that sounded suspiciously like my grandmother's whispered, "Sometimes you need to stop turning the other cheek and stand up for yourself, Maddie girl." In that moment, staring at my tear-stained face in the fitting room mirror, a decision crystallized. I would not be Eleanor Sullivan's doormat any longer. This wasn't just about a dress anymore. It was about whether I could spend the rest of my life being second best in my own family. As Zoe and I slipped out of the boutique unseen, a question hammered in my mind with each heartbeat. Asterisk. Did I even want to marry into the Sullivan family at all? The answer wasn't as straightforward as I once thought it would be. And for the first time, I allowed myself to truly consider what life married to James and eternally connected to Eleanor would actually mean. That evening, I poured my heart out to Zoe over a bottle of wine in my apartment, recounting every detail of what I'd overheard at the bridal shop. It is like I'm in some twisted fairy tale where the evil queen is my future mother-in-law, I said, trying to laugh through tears. Zoe, always my voice of reason, didn't laugh. "Madison, this isn't about a dress or even a venue. This is about how you'll be treated for the rest of your life if you don't establish boundaries now." Her words echoed my own growing realization. The next day, I made 2 appointments. One with a therapist specializing in family dynamics, and another with my office to take some personal days. Dr. Patel, my therapist, helped me process my feelings in those first sessions. "You're experiencing not just grief over the dress, but grief for the relationship with your in-laws that you hope to have," she explained. "Before we discuss actions, we need to be clear about what you want." That question haunted me for days. Did I want to cancel the wedding entirely? Despite everything, the answer was no. I loved James, flaws and all. His inability to stand up to his mother was frustrating, but I believed in the man he could be, separate from Eleanor's influence. I didn't want to lose him, but I needed him to see the dynamic clearly and choose to change it. After a week of intense reflection, I decided to stop being reactive and start being strategic. If Eleanor Sullivan wanted to play chess with my life, she'd find I was no pawn. My first move was subtle. I reached out to a colleague who specialized in historic properties to casually inquire about Hamilton Estate, looking for a client, Mads. He asked, "Something like that," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. What I learned surprised me. Hamilton Estate wasn't actually booked years in advance, as Eleanor had implied. With the right connections and a deposit, it could be secured relatively quickly. I spent hours researching the property's significance to the Sullivan family, learning that Eleanor had her engagement photos taken there, that generations of Sullivans had celebrated milestone events on its grounds. It wasn't just a beautiful venue. It was a symbol of their perceived social status, their family legacy. As I dug deeper, an unexpected email arrived from my grandmother's estate lawyer. The small inheritance she'd left me, which I planned to receive in installments, could be accessed in full immediately due to some paperwork resolution. It wasn't a fortune, but combined with my savings, it was enough for what I was considering. I sat on my balcony that night, looking out at the city lights, weighing the decision before me. Would securing Hamilton Estate be petty revenge or a necessary stand? Was I becoming as manipulative as Eleanor? Then I remembered Rebecca wearing my dress, the one created to honor my grandmother's memory, and Eleanor's dismissive words. "You're still earning your place." No, this wasn't about revenge. This was about refusing to start my marriage from a position of weakness. About showing the Sullivan family that I wouldn't be pushed aside or diminished. The next morning, I made the call to Hamilton Estate to schedule a private appointment, a strange calm settling over me as I took the first step toward reclaiming my self-respect. The Hamilton Estate was even more impressive in person than in photos. a sprawling mansion with immaculate gardens and a breathtaking view of the surrounding countryside. As the venue director, Mrs. Harrington, led me through the grand ballroom with its crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows, I could understand why Eleanor considered it the pinnacle of wedding locations. We typically book 18 months in advance, but we've had a cancellation for May through July this year, Mrs. Harrington explained, her tailored suit and crisp English accent adding to the estate's aura of exclusivity. Drawing on all my real estate negotiation skills, I maintained a professional demeanor despite my racing heart. I understand the Sullivan family has expressed interest in your venue. They're actually my future in-laws, I said, watching her expression carefully. Ah, yes, Eleanor Sullivan has toured several times. Lovely woman. Very particular about details. Of course she was. I took a deep breath and continued. I'd like to book the estate for June 17th, and I am prepared to make a substantial deposit today to secure exclusive rights for a 3-month period surrounding that date. Mrs. Harrington's eyebrows raised slightly at the unusual request, but business was business. By the end of our 2-hour meeting, I had negotiated terms that would make any real estate agent proud. Exclusive booking rights for the estate from May through July. A non-refundable deposit that made my bank account weep, but left my spine straight with resolve and absolute confidentiality regarding the arrangement. As I drove home, a strange mixture of emotions swirled within me, guilt for the secrecy, anxiety about James' reaction, but predominantly a growing sense of empowerment that had been missing since the dress incident. Meanwhile, I channeled my wedding planning energy in new directions. I found an up-and-coming dress designer whose work I admired on Instagram, Lusana Torres, who promised to create a gown even more breathtaking than my first, working overtime to meet my shortened timeline. When you told me what happened, I knew I had to help, Lashana said during our first consultation. No bride should have her dreams stolen. James had noticed my emotional distance in the weeks following the dress incident, but attributed it to lingering hurt rather than active planning. He made sweet but insufficient gestures to make amends, bringing home my favorite desserts, suggesting weekend getaways, even offering to help me look for a new dress. During a rare quiet dinner at home, I finally addressed the elephant in the room. James, we need to talk about your mother's behavior and what it means for her future, I said, setting down my fork and meeting his eyes directly. It's not just about the dress anymore. It's about respect, boundaries, and what kind of family we want to build together. For the first time, I detailed the pattern of subtle put-downs, the constant comparison to Rebecca, the comments about my background and appearance that he'd never seemed to notice. I love you, James, but I can't spend my life being treated as less than by your mother. And I can't be with someone who wanted to stand with me when it matters. It was the most honest conversation we'd ever had, raw and uncomfortable, but necessary. To his credit, James listened, really listened, without jumping to his mother's defense. I knew Mom could be difficult, but I never realized how calculated it was, he admitted, running his hands through his hair in distress. I always thought you were just being sensitive about some of her comments. I'm so sorry, Mads. He agreed to attend pre-marriage counseling, a step he previously dismissed as unnecessary, and promised to speak with Eleanor about respecting boundaries. I believed his intentions were genuine, even if his follow-through remained to be seen. 2 days later, as James was in the shower, his phone pinged with an email notification. I normally wouldn't look, but the subject line caught my eye. Hamilton Estate booking confirmation. My own confirmation had arrived. The plan was officially in motion. There was no turning back now. The evening of Eleanor's formal engagement announcement party for Rebecca arrived with perfect dramatic timing. Just 3 days after I'd received final confirmation that Hamilton Estate was secured in my name. The Sullivan family home was decorated lavishly, crystal glasses catching the light as servers circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Eleanor had seated James and me at the far end of the table, away from the immediate family members clustered around Rebecca and her fiancé Chad. I wore a sleek black dress that made me feel armored for battle, though outwardly I maintained a pleasant smile. As Eleanor tapped her glass for attention, she announced, "We're so blessed to celebrate Rebecca and Chad's journey toward marriage." Her voice warm with genuine affection I'd never heard directed at me. And we thrilled to share that we've via almost finalized arrangements for the perfect venue, the Hamilton estate, where Sullivan family history runs deep, will be the setting for Rebecca's dream wedding this summer. Murmurs of approval circulated the table as various aunts and uncles nodded appreciatively. Rebecca beamed, adding, "We're just waiting for the final paperwork, but Mom's connections have practically guaranteed it'll be ours for June 17th. I felt James glance at me, clearly noting my sudden intense focus on my water glass. I told him nothing about Hamilton, knowing this confrontation needed to happen organically. Throughout dinner, Eleanor and Rebecca discussed wedding plans in excruciating detail, from the imported flowers to the custom-designed table settings. The Hamilton ballroom will look magnificent with the Sullivan family silver candelabras, Eleanor mused, speaking directly to Rebecca's future mother-in-law, while pointedly ignoring me. Our family has always envisioned celebrating our most significant moments there. I remained quiet, picking at my roasted salmon and mentally rehearsing what would inevitably come after dessert. As guests moved to the living room for coffee, James cornered me in the hallway, his expression troubled. "What's going on with you? You've barely said 2 words all night, and you practically flinched every time Mom mentioned Hamilton Estate." The moment of truth had arrived sooner than I'd anticipated. Taking a deep breath, I met his eyes and spoke quietly but firmly. "Hamilton Estate is already booked for the entire summer. I know because I booked it." The shock on his face would have been comical in any other situation. "You did what?" he hissed, pulling me into Eleanor's empty study for privacy. "Why would you do that? How could you do that to my sister?" The argument that followed was intense but hushed, neither of us wanting to create a scene at the party. James accused me of being vindictive, of stooping to his mother's level. I laid out every manipulation, every slight, every instance where he'd failed to defend me, culminating in the wedding dress theft. "Your mother took something irreplaceable from me, something with deep personal meaning, and gave it to Rebecca because she decided your sister deserved it more. She has been telling me I donned to belong in your family since the day we got engaged. This isn't about revenge, James. This is about finally standing up for myself when no one else would." The hurt and the confusion on his face nearly broke my resolve. But years of accumulated pain had finally found their voice. "I need some time to think," he said eventually, his voice strained. "This isn't the woman I thought I was marrying." He left the study without looking back, and I heard the front door close moments later. I sat alone in Eleanor's impeccable study, surrounded by framed Sullivan family photos, in which I appeared in none, wondering if I had just destroyed my relationship in my attempt to save my dignity. I drove home alone that night, fully expecting to find James waiting, but our apartment remained empty until morning. I'd barely slept when my phone rang at 7 o'clock. Eleanor, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. "Madison, the estate manager, just called me. She says Hamilton is booked for the entire summer by someone else, someone with your name." The confrontation I'd imagined for weeks was finally happening. But instead of satisfaction, I felt strangely calm. "Yes, Eleanor. It is. I booked it weeks ago." Her gasp was audible. "Why would you do such a spiteful thing? This is Rebecca's dream venue. This is a Sullivan family tradition. The perfect opening had been handed to me. Like my wedding dress was my tradition. The one custom made to honor my grandmother, that you gave to Rebecca because she would wear it better. The silence on the other end spoke volumes. When Eleanor finally responded, her voice had dropped to a dangerous softness. James will never forgive you for this. He understands the importance of family loyalty. I was formulating my response when I heard the apartment door open. James had returned, his expression unreadable as he set his keys on the counter. "I need to go, Eleanor," I said simply, and ended the call before she could protest. The moment of truth had arrived, not just about Hamilton Estate or a wedding dress, but about the future of our relationship and what kind of man James Sullivan truly was. James stood in our kitchen, looking exhausted, his usually immaculate appearance rumpled from what had clearly been a sleepless night. I drove around for hours, then crashed at Ethan's place, he explained, referring to his college roommate. I needed to think without anyone's influence. The silence between us felt heavy with the weight of decisions that would determine our future. Finally, he spoke words I never expected to hear. "I'm sorry, Madison. I'm so sorry I didn't see what was happening. I've been making excuses for my mother my entire life, telling myself she means well, even when her actions hurt people I care about." He walked over and took my hands, his voice thick with emotion. "What she did with your dress was inexcusable." And my response was even worse. "I dismissed something precious to you as just fabric because it was easier than confronting her." For the first time, I saw James clearly, not just the man I loved, but also the son who'd been conditioned to prioritize his mother's feelings above all else. "I talked with Ethan all night," he continued. "He pointed out things I've been blind to for years, how Mom treats you versus Rebecca, how she sabotaged every relationship I've had that she didn't personally approve. I don't want to lose you, Mads, and I don't want to be the kind of husband who doesn't protect his wife." His words were healing a wound I hadn't realized was still bleeding. The following week was transformative. We attended our first counseling session with Dr. Patel, focusing specifically on establishing healthy family boundaries. James finally confronted Eleanor about the dress, demanding its return, despite knowing it was too late. The alterations had rendered it unrecognizable, transformed to fit Rebecca's significantly different proportions and style preferences. When Eleanor tried to minimize her actions, James stood firm. "What you did was theft, Mom. You took something that didn't belong to you, something with deep sentimental value, and gave it away without permission. I can't allow you to treat Madison this way anymore." Eleanor's shocked expression would have been satisfying if the situation weren't so painful. James and I made a decision that felt both perfect and empowering. We would hold a small, intimate ceremony at Hamilton Estate before Rebecca's planned date, with just our closest friends and my family in attendance. "The estate is yours legally for those months," James acknowledged, "but I don't want our wedding to be about getting back at my mother. I want it to be about us, starting our life together on our terms." His growth in those weeks was remarkable. A man emerging from his mother's shadow to stand as my partner in the truest sense. Eleanor, realizing she couldn't change the Hamilton situation, attempted reconciliation in her own limited way. She invited me to lunch at her country club, where she offered what passed for an apology in Eleanor's speak. Perhaps I acted hastily with the dress situation. "I've ordered a selection of designer gowns for you to consider instead." When I politely declined, explaining I'd already commissioned a new dress, she pressed on about Hamilton Estate. "Surely we can reach some compromise. Rebecca has her heart set on a June wedding there." I met her gaze steadily, newfound confidence flowing through me. "James and I will be having a small ceremony there on June 1st. After that, we'd be happy to include Rebecca's wedding in our booking as our gift to her." Eleanor's expression cycled through shock, calculation, and finally reluctant acceptance. She recognized the shift in power dynamics, but couldn't resist one parting shot. "I suppose I underestimated you, Madison. You're more solid than I thought." I smiled genuinely for the first time in her presence. No, Eleanor, I'm 100% Madison Walker. And it's time everyone remembered that. Our ceremony at Hamilton Estate was everything I daydreamed of, but not in the way I originally imagined. 15 guests instead of 200. Luciana's stunning creation, a sleek, modern gown that honored my style rather than trying to recreate the past. My father walking me down the aisle to where James waited, his eyes filled with tears and pride. Zoe as my only bridesmaid, holding a bouquet that included my grandmother's favorite flowers. We exchanged vows under the estate's ancient oak tree, promising not just love and fidelity, but partnership and mutual respect. Eleanor attended, maintaining a dignified silence throughout the ceremony. Her gift to us, a set of silver candlesticks that had belonged to James' grandfather. A small but significant acknowledgement of my place in the family. After our honeymoon, we formally transferred the remaining Hamilton estate dates to Rebecca, but with clear written terms, establishing that it was our gift to her, not Eleanor's arrangement. It was petty, perhaps, but necessary. A tangible reminder that our marriage would begin with boundaries firmly in place. The look on Rebecca's face when she realized I held the power to grant or deny her dream venue was quickly replaced by genuine gratitude when she understood we weren't going to stand in her way. "Thank you," she said simply. And for the first time, I felt something approaching a sisterly connection between us. The dress situation remained a painful memory, but I'd found something more valuable than fabric and lace. My voice, my boundaries, and a husband who finally understood how to honor both. 1 year has passed since our wedding day at Hamilton Estate, and I'm sitting on our apartment balcony, watching the sunset paint the city in gold and pink hues, reflecting on how much has changed. The woman I was before the wedding dress incident feels like a different person sometimes, someone who constantly sought approval, who swallowed hurt feelings to keep peace, who believed loving someone meant accepting mistreatment from their family. Today's Madison Walker Sullivan stands much taller, with boundaries clear as the horizon line stretching before me. My relationship with James has deepened in ways I couldn't have imagined during those painful months of conflict. The pre-marriage counseling we started during the crisis has become a regular practice for us. A monthly tune-up to ensure we re-communicating effectively and supporting each other as growth. James has blossomed away from his mother's manipulative influence, discovering his own values and voice. I never realized how much of my life was lived trying to avoid disappointing her, he confessed recently. It's exhausting to live that way, and I'm sorry I expected you to do the same. Eleanor remains Eleanor, a woman unlikely to change fundamentally at her age. But our dynamic has shifted dramatically. After witnessing James' transformation and realizing I couldn't be intimidated or controlled, she's developed a reluctant respect for me. She still makes occasional comments about my clothing choices or career decisions, but they lack the barbed edges that once drew blood. I've learned to respond with pleasant firmness. "Thank you for your input, Eleanor, but we're happy with our decision." The wedding dress incident taught me that forgiveness doesn't require forgetting. I've forgiven Eleanor, not for her sake, but for mine. Carrying bitterness would only poison my own happiness. Yet forgiveness doesn't mean unlimited access or influence in our lives. We maintain healthy distance, limiting visits to major holidays and family events, always with clear boundaries and exit strategies. James supports these boundaries without question now, understanding they protect our marriage rather than threatening his relationship with his mother. Rebecca and I have developed an unexpectedly friendly relationship built on the foundation of mutual respect that formed after the Hamilton Estate resolution. She confided recently that she'd never wanted my dress in the first place. "It was Eleanor who convinced me I deserved it," she said, playing on insecurities I had about my own engagement. "Mom has always pitted us against each other. she admitted during a rare sister-in-law lunch. "I'm sorry I participated in that. This spring brought joyful news, and I are expecting our first child, a development that has intensified our commitment to maintaining healthy family boundaries. We've already had frank discussions about Eleanor's future role as grandmother, establishing guidelines before the baby arrives. Our child will never be used as a pawn or compared to cousins," James stated firmly during a difficult but necessary conversation with his mother. "Every grandparent in their life will respect our parenting decisions, or their access will be limited." In a surprising twist of fate, I found myself mentoring other women navigating difficult in-law relationships. It began with a colleague's tearful confession about her future mother-in-law's interference and spread through word of mouth, until I started a monthly support group that meets at a local cafe. "You helped me find my voice," one woman told me last month, after successfully establishing boundaries with her husband's overbearing family. "I never thought I could stand up for myself without losing my relationship." I kept a small square of fabric from my original wedding dress, a piece the seamstress had removed during Rebecca, as alterations and thoughtfully saved for me. It sits framed on my bedside table, not as a reminder of what I lost, but as a symbol of what I gained: the strength to advocate for myself, the wisdom to recognize when relationships are unhealthy, and the courage to establish boundaries even when it's frightening. Perhaps the most important lesson from my journey is that true love requires truth. James and I had to face uncomfortable realities about his family dynamics, my conflict avoidance tendencies, and what kind of marriage we wanted to build. Only by confronting these truths head on could we create something authentic and strong enough to withstand future challenges. If you've ever found yourself diminished by someone else's agenda, questioned your worth because of another's criticism, or swallowed your needs just to keep the peace, know this: you deserve better. Standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary for genuine relationships to flourish. Your voice matters. Your boundaries deserve respect. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for others is to say, "This is not acceptable to me." Thank you for joining me on this journey of self-discovery and growth. I do love to hear about your own experiences with difficult family dynamics and how you navigated them. Have you ever had to establish tough boundaries with in-laws or family members? What helped you find your voice in challenging relationships? Please share your stories in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life journeys of transformation. Remember, the path to self-respect may begin with a painful moment, like losing a treasured wedding dress, but it can lead to gaining something far more valuable: